Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 68th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1995. Ron Howard directed one of the biggest movies of the year in Apollo 13, about the famous 1970 space mission of the same name. But despite strong frontrunner buzz earlier in the year, Ron Howard shockingly failed to land a Best Director nomination at the Oscars, while another actor-turned-director, Mel Gibson, snuck in to win Best Picture and Best Director with Braveheart. So why did Apollo 13 lose its steam with the Oscars? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Apollo 13. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today with me I have another great special guest from the Screeners podcast and also a writer for Next Best Picture, among other things. I have with me Mr. Daniel Howat.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, and this is a really fun year to cover. This is 1995. And this is a year that kind of established some stats that a lot of people have been following since in the Oscar race. And so there's also a lot of weird snubs and all kinds of crazy stuff happening. So
yes,
I'm excited to jump in. So today's runner-up is going to be Apollo 13. And let's jump into a quick summary of Apollo 13. It is based on the book Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13, written by James Lovell and Jeffrey Kluger, and tells the real-life story of the failed Apollo 13 mission to the moon in 1970, which had 3 astronauts on board, including Commander Lovell himself, played by Tom Hanks, lunar module pilot Fred Hayes, played by Bill Paxton, the late Bill Paxton, and Jack Swigert, played by Kevin Bacon, who becomes part of the mission after the original Commander Module pilot, Ken Mattingly, played by Gary Sinise, contracts the measles. So as they're in space on the way to the moon, there's this routine test that goes wrong, and it basically forces the ship to try to come home against basically insurmountable odds. And the film also stars Ed Harris, Kathleen Quinlan, and a huge ensemble of actors. It was directed by Ron Howard and written by Williams Broyles Jr. and Al Reinert. The movie was a huge hit in 1995. It was the number 3 movie of the year, made $172 million domestic and $355 million worldwide. So major hit. And it was nominated for 9 Academy Awards and won 2 of those, but not Best Picture. So, Daniel, what are your thoughts on Apollo 13?
Well, based on those grosses, what I'm hearing is it would have been a surefire contender for Best Popular Film.
There it is. We always got to sneak in one of those every episode.
Every time. Yeah.
Yep.
I love Apollo 13 so much, and it holds up so well. I really loved rewatching it. It had been probably a year or 2 since I watched it, but I really love this movie. Grew up watching it with my family, and me and my family just loved this whole era of space exploration, and we watched the miniseries From the Earth to the Moon, which was really kind of birthed out of Apollo 13, and produced by Ron Howard and Spielberg and Tom Hanks and all of them. So I definitely have a lot of history with this movie. And what strikes me so much about this movie is that even though it's over 20 years old, it still feels really real and feels so accurate and so true to its time. And it doesn't feel overly glamorized, it doesn't feel like it has the Hollywood treatment. It doesn't feel over sensationalized. It feels pretty honest to me, I guess, honest to the real events. And it's funny enough, it's funny that you asked me to do this episode because I kind of have some history with both Apollo 13 and Braveheart. I took a class in college called an elective called History and Film, I think is what it was called. And I was a film major, so it sounded interesting to me. But then I found out it was a history class, not a film class. And
Mm.
it was really just about like how historically accurate films are, or how historically accurate they can be. And my professor and all of the history majors that were in that class constantly railed against Braveheart for how historically inaccurate it is.
Yep.
That it's the worst movie of all time and all this. And so it's hilarious. And then they would come back and say that the most historically accurate film, in their opinion, is Apollo 13. So very juxtaposed films here in terms of their approach to history. So yeah, absolutely. I love this movie, and it just feels so authentic and strong. It almost feels like Spielberg could have directed it in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But then I say that, but then on the other hand, sometimes it really feels like it doesn't revel in the emotions as much as Spielberg does. It kind of presents things more naturally instead of kind of building these really hyper emotional moments. So I kind of went back and forth in thinking that it feels like a Spielberg film, but the cast just works so well together. The score, the way it's shot, the zero gravity stuff was, I think, pretty revolutionary at the time, and just really added to the authenticity. So yeah, my overall opinions on this movie, love it. Absolutely love it. It's a fantastic movie.
2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
Yeah. That is absolutely something that I noticed on this rewatch, was just how very Spielbergian it could be at times.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very kind of American idealism and exceptionalism, and a docudrama about an important moment in our history. And, we do have like a swelling score by the late James Horner. Really great score, by the way.
Yeah.
Really adds to the emotion and the tension.
Absolutely.
And it just has really very economical storytelling, despite being like 2 hours and 20 minutes long. I feel like it still manages to just hold your attention the entire time. It never really drags in any way. Even the moments that are away from the actual mission, like when we're on the ground, when we're dealing with Jim Lovell's wife, Marilyn, I think a lot of it just adds to the overall feeling of the film. And it kind of makes me feel that sense of that they don't make them like they used to anymore kind of sensibility.
Yeah.
That like all generations can kind of look at this movie and be like, wow, now that was a great movie. That kind of thing.
It's so true. It's so gripping throughout that it doesn't feel like it's 2 hours and 20 minutes. It really, yes, it feels like it tells a full story, but it, like exactly like you said, it really keeps you into the story the whole time, even as it's jumping from Earth to space and back.
Absolutely. And I also just wanted to mention how great the ensemble cast is here. Not to jump ahead too much, but this is a movie that wins the first ever Screen Actors Guild Ensemble Award, and rightfully so, I think, because it's top to bottom amazing, from obviously the 3 guys, Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton, to the people in Houston Mission Control, from Ed Harris to all kinds of character actors in there. And the people that are watching just on their screens, like Kathleen Quinlan and all of the families. I think they all play such a great part and add to the authenticity.
Absolutely.
And I did actually want to talk first just a little bit about some of the ground scenes, because I think they are not entirely remembered as like the most memorable things from Apollo 13. Sometimes scenes where it's like the wife and other people from home can sometimes feel in certain movies just kind of obligatory, and to break up some of the tension of what's happening in quote unquote the real story.
Yeah.
But I think upon this rewatch, I was really, really impressed by Kathleen Quinlan, especially because I think she really captures that sense of fear and just protectiveness for her family. It's a really underrated performance, and she brings a lot to kind of a stock character in some ways. So
yeah, I totally agree. One scene that always stuck with me, even as a kid, anytime I think of Apollo 13, one of the scene, not the scene that I think of, but one of them is the scene of her losing her ring in the
Yes.
shower. I don't know. I don't exactly know why that stuck with me, but for some reason that scene is always in my head. I think it's just the tragedy of she's already superstitious about it being the 13th mission, and that's not a great sign. And then you lose your wedding ring. So I always think back to that scene for some strange reason. And yeah, I agree. I think she really nailed that performance that often can feel unnecessary, or just the emotional stuff on the ground. But yeah, I agree. I think she nailed it.
Yeah. And I also I really like one scene that's very, very small and kind of unmemorable to many, I would imagine, but it's a scene of her watching the news very, very like diligently because she doesn't want to miss a single moment
Mm.
or a single update of what's happening after the mission has gone wrong and there's a
Hmm.
chance that her husband might die in space. And it's a scene where she's watching the TV and her son is kind of calling for her, and she has to make a decision between like wanting to know every single thing that's happening in space and also going off to take care of her kid.
Yeah.
And it's just a really powerful little story that's weaved into this movie, I think.
Yeah.
And
The
so,
idea of watching along with the entire world to find out the fate of your husband
mm,
is really powerful. And I think they portray that really excellently. Especially I love the juxtaposition of that with the earlier scenes where they do broadcast directly from the shuttle and nobody cares.
oh
Nobody's
God,
watching. And
yeah,
so I really love the way that they showed both sides of that, and then the world can't stop watching. So yeah, I thought that was so well done.
yeah. And that's also a really interesting, subtle moment that they weave in as well, because it shows like the nature of kind of the news itself and what
Hmm.
draws people's attention. Like, we already saw people go to the moon. We don't need to like see anything like this again. Like,
Right,
we've been through
right.
this. This isn't news. So
Yeah,
I just thought that was kind of funny.
absolutely.
Um, so let's talk just about this crazy story itself, based on a true story, obviously.
Hmm.
It all kind of hinges on this one little mistake, this one flaw in the system, that is the liquid oxygen tank, and they have to stir the fans, and one of them ends up exploding.
Hmm.
And we later find out that it turned out to just be a faulty system, like just a little mistake that happened years ago that they couldn't have known about. So what did you make of this story being told like this?
I thought, like I said, I think it feels really I think it feels really honest to what really happened. Obviously, from what I know, I'm no historian, but it feels really honest, and I love that it's just it feels like such a classic story of a group of people rallying to overcome disaster.
Hmm.
And unlike a lot of disaster movies, this one is the majority of the film is mid disaster. Is it going to turn into a disaster? How are we going to survive this? And obviously we know everything ended up okay. Spoilers, but I just love,
Spoilers for real life.
yeah, I just love that. I just love stories of ordinary men and women just overcoming such grave obstacles, and in this story no less, doing it hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth. It
Hmm.
is pretty remarkable.
Absolutely. And it also really brought to mind a feeling of anxiety that I get sometimes, just the idea of you can make one little action and it can have these
Yeah,
ramifications. You could just say, like, obviously, it's nothing on this scale. Like, I can't even imagine.
sure.
But even in my own life, just thinking of one thing I might have said one time or done one thing and changed history or made things go for the worse, and feel like that sense of anger at myself and like regret, even if it's something like this, where this wasn't really in their control to mess up, really. This was
Right.
a thing that happened years ago. And so I think it captures that sense well
Yeah.
in a similar way to a movie I obviously talked about in 2013, which is Gravity.
Yeah, definitely.
That feeling of kind of, what do I do in this situation? How do I reverse the course here? Because this is a life threatening situation, and this one action that I've taken even if it's not in my control, manage to put me in a very grave situation. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, that's
really
good.
powerful stuff.
It is. Yeah, I thought of Gravity so often watching this movie
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
It's I don't know how you can't at this point. It's Gravity is Apollo 13 cranked up to 25. It's just
Right.
yeah, but that's good. That's good. And I love, well, yes, one thing can screw up and have these ripple effects, but I think more importantly, what Apollo 13 kind of tells us is we can overcome it, and
Exactly.
everything can be overcome. So that one mistake isn't going to ruin everything.
And you can improvise, which is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so let's talk about the scenes in Houston Mission Control. First of all, just want to acknowledge the famous quote, Houston, we have a problem. It
Mm-hmm.
all comes from this. So, origin story. So, Ed Harris specifically. So, Ed Harris gets a supporting actor nomination here for playing Gene Kranz. And he also gets kind of a few quotes that people might remember from the movie, including saying, like, when someone says this could be the worst disaster for NASA and NASA history, and then he responds, with all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also says at one point, of course, failure is not an option. So
Yeah,
it
it's
all
good.
brings home the point of this idea of overcoming and exceptionalism and idealism. And
Mm-hmm.
what did you make of Ed Harris's performance here?
I think he's fantastic. I think he does a really great job of keeping that stoic optimism and being the guy who has to be strong for the ground. I think he does a really great job. If I'm being totally honest, I don't know if you want to dive into Oscar talk too much, but I don't quite get behind him as a supporting actor contender. It just feels a little small for me.
Yeah.
Even as good as he is, and I don't want to take anything away from how good he is in the role. When I watch the movie, there are so many other performances that stand out, and the same thing goes for Kathleen Quinlan. Actually, I was a little surprised that you felt the opposite way.
Okay.
But as good as they are, again, I don't want to take away from that. But I was so much more impressed with other performances in the film that I look back. I had totally forgotten that Kathleen Quinlan was nominated. I didn't even remember that. I remembered Ed Harris, but I did not remember that. So that took me off guard a little bit. But all that said, I think he does a great job of leading that crew on the ground for sure.
Yeah. Well, for Kathleen Quinlan, I think she has the benefit of the same thing that Kim Basinger benefited from, was that she's kind of the only prominent female in the
Yeah,
movie. So there's
yeah,
that.
absolutely.
But as far as Ed Harris, I was definitely prepared to come on and be like exactly what you were saying, which is I'm a little bit skeptical of like the worthiness of this nomination.
Yeah,
I think it's a very good Ed Harris performance.
right.
I'm certainly not seeing a win, which is what happened at SAG.
Yeah,
But it's a decent performance. It's one of those kind of nominations that not a lot of people might understand as
yeah,
strong acting, a little bit in the sense of like how certain people felt about Willem Dafoe in the Florida Project or something like that, where
right.
it's very subtle acting, but I think in a way he does sort of carry that sense of stoicism to him very well. So
He does. Yeah, he's a good straight man, I guess, for the crew in space in a lot of ways.
exactly. So let's actually talk about the three main actors here: Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, Bill Paxton. I think another great Tom Hanks performance. I mean, I
Mhm.
understand why he's not nominated. This is 2 years after winning twice in a row.
Right.
He's probably a little bit burnt out with always wanting to nominate him, but it's still, I think, a great classic kind of Tom Hanks leading man performance. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is fantastic here. I am still a little surprised that he didn't get the nomination,
Hmm.
just because it is peak Tom Hanks. This is the height of his career. I think I totally understand probably the fatigue of him being nominated, and probably people were like, "Ugh, him again? I don't want him to take it again," and so they probably didn't vote for him. So I get that, but I think it is a very worthy performance had it been nominated, because I think he would have had my vote for sure. I really love his performance.
Yeah, he absolutely carries this. And it is, I mean, it is an ensemble piece at the end of the day, but
Yes,
I think
definitely.
you need someone like him to really just bring it on home, I suppose. And Kevin Bacon and Bill Paxton, very good in their roles. Not necessarily nomination worthy, but really lend a lot to the overall atmosphere, I think. And they have a decent chemistry between them as well. So,
Yeah, and I love that you really get a sense of like the intimacy of the three of them, especially with when Gary Sinise is there, and then when Jack comes in and kind of breaks up that intimacy.
mm,
But throughout the crisis, they get closer and closer. I think back to moments like where Tom Hanks warm up Bill Paxton. He's got the fever, and he just kind of has to keep him warm and keep him alive, basically. And
mhm.
I just thought that was a really sweet moment, a great small moment in the midst of all this chaos. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I really love the three of them together.
Yeah, that is a really nice moment. And I also just like the moment where they kind of rip off their body
Yeah,
sensors
that's
that
great.
kind of in solidarity. So, yeah, really nice chemistry between them. And I just wanted to mention a random funny moment that I wrote down. It's probably stupid and corny to most people, but I just enjoyed the moment where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are with Jim's mother,
Right.
and they're just kind of trying to comfort her. And she's just like, "Oh, are you boys in the space program too?"
Right, right.
It's a
Yeah,
stupid little winking thing to the audience, but I enjoyed
yeah.
it.
It
What can
felt
I say?
so that felt so Spielbergian for sure. That was just
Oh yeah,
like
for
a
sure.
very grand moment. And that's Ron Howard's mom, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, that's a great moment.
Yeah. And the ending, I have to say, is just so powerful in kind of this beautiful, earnest, grand Hollywood way, I think, without, like you said, kind of without being too sensationalized. I
Mhm.
think it absolutely earns that ending.
Yeah.
And kind of like what I was talking about with Gravity, it's very similar how it's just this one thing going down and kind of going up in flames around it.
Yep.
Very
Yep.
similar there. But by the end, and then they manage to make contact, and the cheers. I mean, it makes you cheer, you know?
Absolutely. This is such a crowd pleasing ending all
Hmm.
around. It's such a good ending.
Absolutely. So, is there anything else that you want to get into about Apollo 13 before we talk about its weird Oscar success and failure?
There's plenty to talk about there.
Yeah.
No, overall, not to repeat myself too much, I just really love this movie. I think if you like this movie, you should watch that miniseries From the Earth to the Moon because it feels like a direct sequel to this. It feels the same visual style and all of that. And that one is produced by Spielberg. And so, yeah, it feels like a good additive piece. And I love their episode on Apollo 13 is all set on the ground. It's all set from newscasters covering it. And
Hmm.
so that really, again, feels like such a great companion piece to the movie. So, but all around, this movie is so good and it holds up so well. I was trying to think of some negatives because I know I've been really positive on this movie. The only things that kind of stuck out to me were some of the effects, specifically of the launch, didn't
Oh
hold up
yeah, yeah,
super
yeah.
well.
Yeah. That's how I
But
felt too.
but on the other hand, all the zero G stuff felt so good because most of it was real. So that was really fantastic. So yeah, this is a great movie that it absolutely has earned its place in history.
Absolutely. As far as tiny little nitpick negatives for me, I would just say that there were a few moments in the beginning, like you kind of mentioned with the ring falling in,
Mhm.
and there's another scene where Tom Hanks is in the Corvette and it's like not working correctly.
Mhm.
Like moments like this reminded me a little bit of like, oh, the Titanic can't sink.
Right,
You know,
right.
a
Yeah, I'll
little
give
bit
you that.
just like cute little foreshadowing things that are a little bit heavy-handed.
Yeah,
Those things kind of irk me a little bit sometimes in movies. So
absolutely. That's fair. Those are fair complaints.
yeah, but like yeah, on the whole, I have to say it's one of my favorite rewatches that I've done yet for this show. It's a really great, optimistic, idealistic movie without being cheap and sentimental. And people might see it that way. It certainly appears like it is kind of just that rah-rah Americanism, too much patriotism sort of thing. But I think it earns it. And I think this is by far for me, Ron Howard's best movie. And so it's a real shame that he doesn't get nominated for Best Director.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That is our segue. So when we come back, we will be talking about why Apollo 13 did not manage to win Best Picture because of a little movie called Braveheart.
Let's see. Shit, no volts, only 2 amps. It may die before the main chute's open.
Roger, let's tie all the batteries on a main A and main B.
Flight, they're still showering a bit up there. Do you want to tell them?
Is there anything we could do about it?
Not now, Flight.
And they don't need to know, do they?
Copy that.
Is this typhoon still a presence in the splashdown?
Yeah.
We got the parachute situation, the heat shield, the angular trajectory, and the typhoon. There's just so many variables. I'm a little
I know what
lost.
the problems are, Henry. This could be the worst disaster NASA's ever experienced.
With all due respect, sir, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Expect entry interface in 45 seconds. And on my mark, your velocity will be 35,245 feet per second. Marked. 35 seconds to entry interface. Gentlemen, it's been a privilege flying with you.
And we're back. So now we're going to talk about why Apollo 13 lost Best Picture to Braveheart. So Apollo 13 earned 9 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Ed Harris, Best Supporting Actress for Kathleen Quinlan, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Film Editing, Best Original Dramatic Score, Best Sound, and Best Visual Effects. And it walked away with 2 of those, Best Film Editing and Best Sound. And before the Academy Awards, it managed to win the 3 major Guild Awards, which were the SAG Ensemble, as I said, and PGA, which was very important, and DGA for Ron Howard. So, as you may have noticed in that list of nominations, Ron Howard was not included for Best Director. Huge shock at the time. Everyone was very upset. And so let's get into how Braveheart kind of managed to swoop in and steal Apollo 13's thunder a little bit. So why do you think Ron Howard did not get a nomination here?
You know, I was trying to think about that. If I'm being honest, the answer is I have no freaking clue. It still doesn't make sense to me. You know, I was trying to come up with a rational explanation, but this is just such a weird year. Looking at Best Picture and Best Director, it's so similar to 2012. It's just so weird. You know, because you have Tim Robbins nominated for Dead Man Walking for director, and Mike Figgis for Leaving Las Vegas, and neither of those nominated for Best Picture. Yes. And Apollo 13 and Sense and Sensibility not making it to Best Director. And I was trying to come up with a rational reason. I can't explain it. I do wonder, you know, I didn't follow the Oscars at the time, being 3 years old. So I don't know what it was like then, but looking at it in hindsight, I wonder if I know Apollo 13 had won PGA and SAG, of course. But I wonder if Apollo 13 wins DGA almost as a result of missing out on the Best Director nomination.
Absolutely.
Kind of like an over response. And that just, unlike Argo, it didn't carry over into pushing it to Best Picture. So that's kind of the question I have. I don't know.
Yeah. And I read the Inside Oscar 2 book,
Yeah.
and they kind of mention the overall feeling in the air about this snub. And some theorize that it was what they call the Opie factor, which, if people don't know, some younger people, obviously Ron Howard was an actor before he was a director. He played Opie on the Andy Griffith Show. Very young kid at the time, and then he grew up and became this great director. And there was maybe a sense of like, well, maybe we still see him as this kid. And also, I think there are other factors maybe that include the director's branch being like, well, obviously Ron Howard is going to get nominated, so I'm just going to go with my passion pick.
Right, that's possible.
Which is pretty much what happened, I think, with Ben Affleck, with Argo in 2012, and maybe even with Catherine Bigelow, Zero Dark 30.
Yeah.
And they just went in a totally different direction with Amour and Beasts of the Southern Wild there.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have, Dead Man Walking and Leaving Las Vegas.
It's so weird. You mentioned the Opie factor. The Academy has this history of awarding Best Director to famous actors. Obviously, it happened in place of Ron Howard with Mel Gibson.
Yeah, literally this year. Yeah.
Yeah, that year. And Tim Robbins was nominated as well. And so it's so weird that Ron Howard couldn't do it. Somebody who I guess it doesn't apply to actors who stop acting. You have to keep acting, and then they'll give you the Oscar.
I guess so. Yeah. And I also think maybe with Mel Gibson in comparison to Ron Howard, I think there's a little bit of an edginess and like a cool factor, especially at that time for Mel Gibson. This was before a lot of the, controversies, as it were. And so maybe, Ron Howard's kind of seen as a little bit of a safer choice, a little, not the cool choice to pick necessarily, a little more establishment. So,
which is so funny because now that's exactly how I see not the cool factor, but the establishment factor. It's exactly how I see Ron Howard.
Absolutely.
Like when he was hired for Solo, so much of the internet, myself included, was kind of like, oh, okay, he's a safe choice. But I know I called him a safe choice, but Apollo 13 is fantastic, and he has so many other great movies. So it's just interesting how we can kind of rewrite history a little bit.
Yeah, very interesting. And it's also interesting because before the kind of random groundswell for Braveheart happened, this was kind of perceived as a race between Apollo 13 and Sense and Sensibility.
Mm-hmm.
And we end up here with the Oscars with neither of their directors getting nominated.
Yeah.
Ang Lee does not get nominated here either, which is almost equally surprising.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of one of these crazy years that made us wake up and feel like, well, maybe certain things that we think about when we predict the Oscars aren't as safe as we thought.
Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. What you said earlier, just the feeling of safeness. Obviously, Apollo 13 and Sense and Sensibility are going to get nominated, so I'm going to vote for other things. And it's just, I can't think of any other explanation other than that feeling of comfortability.
Exactly. And so, obviously, Braveheart ends up winning picture and director. I have to say, the nomination for Babe in Best Director, you know what? I actually defend that one. I would say, I imagine that was incredibly difficult to direct Babe.
Yes, so, I'll defend that too.
It's an inspired choice for sure.
It's easy to pick on that one just because of the nature of it, and it's the last G-rated movie nominated, which is crazy. It's crazy how family friendly this year is in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah,
Braveheart's the only R-rated Best Picture nominee, which is so strange, and all the rest are PG or G. If I'm not mistaken.
Apollo 13 is pretty kid-friendly, I think,
Yeah, it is. It's PG. It's crazy. So, yeah, what a weird year all around. It's just so bizarre.
And I think when it comes to Braveheart winning over Apollo 13, which, by the way, a fair amount of critics and Oscar predictors were actually thinking Apollo 13 could still take it. because like just a few years earlier, Driving Miss Daisy
Right.
had still won Best Picture without a director nom. So they thought, hey, it could happen again. Why not? And it could lead to the sympathy factor, like what happened with Argo several years in the future. But I think Braveheart was probably considered just ultimately a little bit more of an underdog and a little bit more of the epic sweeping film that tends to win, especially in the 90s, as we were talking about.
It does feel like a classic 90s epic, classic 90s Oscar movie, a little bit more than Apollo 13 does, good or bad. So
exactly. And if we bring it back to the popular film discussion, this would be a good opportunity to just be like, Braveheart Best Picture, Apollo 13, here's your popular film win.
How disgusting. How disgusting.
I know. I'm sorry I even brought that into
that thought is terrible.
Well, it's probably would have happened.
That's absolutely accurate.
Yeah. Ugh. Sorry, I feel disgusted after even saying that.
And that's just what this brings up the exact point of why Oscar for popular film is so stupid and why people forget the history of the Oscars. Yes, nowadays there are fewer movies with huge box office returns that get nominated for Best Picture. There are still plenty of them though that get nominated, but back in the day, not that long ago, all these films were huge hits, and well, not all of them, I should say. A lot of these films were huge hits. And so it's just the movie making experience has changed. People's tastes have changed. And what people actually are willing to pay a huge ticket price for has changed. And so we can't change the rules just because people are seeing different movies in the theater.
Amen. Yeah. And Mark Lamb brings up an interesting hypothetical here because he tweets, very strange year, agreed, with many strong movies and an unlikely winner. The disarray is most evident in the mismatch of Best Picture and Best Director. Sense and Sensibility and Apollo 13 are in Best Picture, but I replaced in Best Director with Leaving Las Vegas and Dead Man Walking. If Ron Howard had been nominated, would Apollo 13 have won Best Picture?
That is a fantastic question, and again, I struggle to know the answer. I would say maybe, but I do think there would still be this groundswell of support that Braveheart has the epic nature to it, the more classic Oscar feel for that time, and so I still think it would probably miss Best Picture. I think it would probably take Director. I think we would probably have a split. Wow. I think I'm willing to be persuaded, Kevin, but I think that's what I'm leaning towards.
Well, the only reason I'm a little bit hesitant is because usually when we have splits, especially in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, it was usually that it was a Best Picture winner that didn't necessarily have that sort of strong visual technical element to it.
Right. Which Braveheart does have, for sure.
Right. And I think they both kind of have that, which is why I think they would just have gone together as they usually do. But I do think it would be a very, very, very close race. And
you still think Braveheart wins both in the end?
I kind of do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I think clearly the Academy didn't love Apollo 13 as much as we wished they had.
Correct.
So
yeah. Because it only wins film editing and sound. Film editing is a good one to win. Very important, of course. Of all the technicals, it's one of the best.
Yeah.
But overall, a little bit disappointing, especially when, it could have won visual effects. It could have won dramatic score,
Yeah.
But here we are. And we should also mention that for the SAG, there was this stat that held up until this year, which was that basically if your movie is not nominated for the SAG Ensemble Award, it's not going to win Best Picture. And the time it was proven wrong is right at the start of SAG here with Braveheart, which was not nominated for SAG and still won Best Picture. And that happened all the way until this very year when The Shape of Water was not nominated for SAG Ensemble and still won Best Picture.
Yeah, and I still do think it's obviously a very strong stat. I think Apollo 13 is such a worthy winner of the inaugural award because it's just got a huge cast, and even the tiniest people do a great job in that movie. So really well deserved win. And that stat is interesting, though. As strong as it is, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't feel like it has a super strong correlation other than just how much the actors love the film. I feel like it's just a a show of how much the actors branch loves your film, instead of actually being that if you didn't get nominated, the cast wasn't strong enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's very interesting. And I do like that it was broken this year, because sometimes people do, myself included, sometimes people
Right.
do rely a little too heavy on random stats like this.
Absolutely.
And I think obviously, like, probably this year, The Shape of Water was probably sixth place or something. So
Right.
it wasn't like a
Fantastic
huge
cast, obviously. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But yeah, really fascinating.
It is.
I want to talk about other movies that were nominated for Best Picture, because, like we said, really, really unique Best Picture lineup this year.
So strange.
And by the way, a very, very strong year, which I did not necessarily remember before researching this year. So many great movies came out this year, but we'll get to those later. So we've got Babe, we've got Il Postino, aka The Postman, and we have Sense and Sensibility. I want to start off this with just talking about Sense and Sensibility. This is a movie that I probably would have leaned more towards, maybe even than Apollo 13, because first of all, I'm an English major. So
Well, there you go.
Jane Austen and Emma Thompson does such a great adaptation
Yes.
of that. And it's such a, and actually it is a great cast, and probably would have made for a good SAG ensemble win of its own. But I think Ang Lee does a really great job of kind of blending the sharpness of Jane Austen's very famous wit, and also kind of giving a soulfulness and a sensitivity that he does in most of his movies to the female leads, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easily deserving of its screenplay win. It's for sure one of the best written films of that year, and it holds up so well. Exactly like you said, the wit is so strong, but it's balanced with this sense of reality and not over romanticizing or anything like that. And that's especially helped by the cast as well. Exactly like you said, such a great cast. So yeah, I think it's a very strong movie. I still give the edge to Apollo 13 personally, but I do love that movie.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with this, it's like they're doing two completely different things.
A little bit different, yeah.
It's very, very difficult to separate what makes one better than the other.
Yeah.
But I think just the depth and the layers and all the relationships happening in Sense and Sensibility just kind of work with my brain more, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know. But
and balanced really well, yeah.
Yeah. And really great Kate Winslet performance, kind of a discovery performance for a lot of people for her. She gets the first of 7 nominations for the Academy. So that's great. Emma Thompson gets double nominations. First time that's happened for an actor and a writer in a very long time. I don't remember when the last one was, but it had been many decades. So,
and if I'm not mistaken, she is the only person to have won an acting Oscar and a screenplay Oscar.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Saying that almost seems wrong. It seems like, wait a second, there's got to be somebody else.
Yeah,
there's not. Yeah,
and is the first woman who is an actress who is nominated in the screenplay categories. So
yeah. It's fantastic.
I admire the hell out of Emma Thompson, and that's also another great performance from her. And I wanted to mention now, because we're going to be talking about Emma Thompson in a few weeks, and then the week after that, really interesting sort of triumvirate of costume dramas that she's in the
she was
early
on fire.
90s. Yeah,
she was on fire during this time. You know, I earlier I mentioned how this is the peak of Tom Hanks's career. I mean, the same could absolutely be said of Emma Thompson. She was in everything. She was showing up at just about every Oscar year for a while there. Yeah, and this was a really, really great year. I'm glad she ended up pulling out the win for screenplay.
Absolutely. And so this is the third in the, I guess you could call the Emma Thompson costume drama cinematic universe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's bring that back. Let's reboot that.
So good.
All right. So other movies, Il Postino. So we have a very rare foreign language nomination here. And there's a lot going. Do you know about kind of the story of Il Postino and all the weird, the narrative behind it? First of all, it's a Harvey Weinstein movie.
Right.
We're talking about him again.
Yep. Unavoidable.
Yeah. So he really campaigned the hell out of this movie, and it clearly worked.
Yeah. Which is still really surprising that it worked so well, getting in director when Ron Howard couldn't do that.
I know. Yeah. And its star, Massimo Troisi, actually died the day after the end of shooting for this movie from a heart attack. So there's a really powerful emotional narrative behind this, and he does get one of very few posthumous nominations for Best Actor, and that is very deserved.
Yeah, absolutely, and screenplay as well. And it's almost impossible. I had never seen The Postman until now.
Neither had I. So,
and it's only available. I could only find it on YouTube. I had to find it. I had to resort to YouTube. I'm ashamed to say, but. It was so sweet, and it's impossible to separate from that story of he literally poured his life into this movie and gave it all and died hours after filming. I mean, what an amazing Hollywood story. Like that is, well, not Hollywood, but just how amazing is that? And it really shows in the movie. The movie is really so sweet and so sad, and
it's beautifully
really
poetic. Yeah,
really poetic. Exactly.
Literally, because it's dealing with a poet as well.
Right.
So
but I really liked that movie a lot. I'm not sure. No, I am sure I wouldn't nominate Michael Radford over Ron Howard or Ang Lee, but it's really awesome that got in here. And because otherwise, this movie might have been lost a little bit to especially American audiences. So yeah, it's really awesome.
Absolutely. I really wish this movie was more available to people because when I went to try to find a streaming link for this, it was basically like not found.
Yeah, it's nowhere. So, can't even pay to watch it.
I know, even if you wanted to. So that's kind of a bummer, but. Really, I appreciate that this gave me the opportunity to see this sweet little movie that has almost gotten lost to time in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree.
Yeah. And the other one is Babe.
Yes.
I
love Babe. I love Babe.
Yes. I just rewatched it for the first time, probably since childhood.
Yeah.
Last night. And I have to tell you, by the end, I'm like tearing up a little bit.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And it's so weird.
Yeah.
But it is so like I love this movie. It's yet another oddity of Oscar history that this movie. Who would ever think that Babe would get nominated for Best Picture, Director, and supporting actor and screenplay? It's wild and so amazing. Yeah, I do not fault the Academy at all. I think it is remarkable.
Yeah, and it became a little bit of a sleeper hit at the end of the year. And so, I mean, this is another movie where I get it, like why just Academy voters and people all over the world got swept up in this simple little tale about a sheep pig. And, I was reading about how a lot of people became vegetarians after this, including James Cromwell himself. And so, that's some nice positive change in the world, I think, in a way.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. And I actually got another question about this on Twitter. So this is from Al Robinson. And he tweeted, why was Heat, Casino, and most importantly, The Usual Suspects passed over for a Best Picture nomination, yet a cute but a silly little movie like Babe and a foreign language film like Il Postino nominated instead?
Al, I love you. I have some problems with that. I don't think just because a film is seen as, more serious or, more dramatic, doesn't necessarily mean it's more worthy of attention. I think that's part of why we have this best popular film category coming back, because people see a distinction between the two, like that one's not worthy of competing against the other. I think Babe is absolutely a worthy contender here, and same with The Postman. I think both are absolutely, they earned their place, and even up against Heat and Casino and the others.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think it's always hard when it comes to the Oscar Best Picture race. It reminds me of what I was talking about with Thomas, with like Chocolat getting in 2000 when it beat all these quote unquote more serious movies.
Right.
It's just like, movies in any genre can be great.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
just because a movie is more serious, dealing with more social themes, whatever the case may be, that doesn't necessarily make it better than this very sweet little movie that does so much in a genre that is so often kind of ridiculed or not taken seriously.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And personally, I would rank like Heat higher in my personal top 10 than Babe or Il Postino. I don't even have Il Postino in my top 10 for this year, but they still earned their place, and they still gave us a very different sort of film. I mean, what a wide variety of films we're looking at here. They are all so incredibly different.
yeah.
And that's amazing. That's worth celebrating, instead of, kind of tearing down one film because you like another.
Yeah, I agree. And as far as a foreign language movie, I will always celebrate a foreign language movie getting into Best Picture. So I
Yeah,
have no
it's awesome.
problems with this at all.
Agree. Especially this one. This is great. It's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah. And
What
also
was the next one nominated at? I guess Crouching Tiger is the
Crouching
next one
Tiger.
I can.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome.
So, and I also just think, as far as beyond our own feelings on these movies, I think the reason they were nominated is because I think there was a really strong narrative behind both of them.
Yeah,
Quite
that's
frankly,
true. Absolutely.
probably stronger than any of those movies.
Yeah.
So,
Very good point.
really interesting race. I'm kind of curious how you would rank these 5 nominees, having seen them all now.
Yeah, I would say, if I was ranking from least favorite to favorite, I would say Il Postino would be number 5. Great movie, love it. Just because it's bottom of the 5, still love it though. And then I would say Babe, Sense and Sensibility. Oh no, sorry. I would do Babe, then Braveheart, Sense and Sensibility, and Apollo 13.
Yeah, that's a pretty similar lineup to me.
Yeah.
I kind of waffle between Apollo 13 and Sense and Sensibility, but I would probably have Il Postino last, which kind of pains me because I really like that.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and then Braveheart, and then Babe, and then as of today, I'm gonna say Apollo 13 number 2 and Sense and Sensibility number 1. But once
Fair
again,
enough.
I have my biases, so
Fair enough.
It's my vote. Okay.
I won't argue too much. Braveheart,
Okay.
we haven't talked too much about Braveheart.
Yeah.
It's a decent movie. I don't think it holds up particularly well. I think it feels kind of dated when you watch it, and
For sure.
I mean, obviously in light of everything with Mel Gibson, that's a whole other story. But it's still a good epic film, exactly like we've already said, like really just like a lot of those great epics of the 90s. It feels like right along with those. It's very long, but it's very entertaining and obviously quotable, just like Apollo 13. So yeah, it's a decent movie still.
I think when it comes down to Braveheart, I think it's in a vacuum. I think it's a very good movie.
Yeah, I think that's
the thing
fair.
for me is when I look at outside factors,
Right.
including the fact that a lot of it is not anywhere close to reality.
Right.
And also the gay controversy there, where they're kind of just making fun of this gay character and throwing him out a window for laughs.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
happened there?
Definitely feels odd.
Yeah. And then you have, I was reading again Inside Oscar, where Mel Gibson is in Playboy, like talking about how like these gay activists are like persecuting him basically. And
Yikes.
I'm just like thinking of today's kind of climate and narrative, and
Yeah.
like that's, I think this whole campaign would have been sunk and it would not have won Best Picture, honestly.
Yeah, yikes. I didn't
So
know about that. Wow.
yeah, not good.
Yeah, especially in light of the way things look now with Gibson, that feels even worse.
Exactly. So
Yikes.
yeah, I'm not even gonna touch that. So
It's so funny. Like I was talking about that history class that I was in, and the whole semester throughout that whole class, everybody would talk about how Braveheart's like one of the worst movies of all time. It's awful, just because there are these historians who rightfully point out how inaccurate Braveheart is. But every now and then, I was the only film student. I had to raise my hand and go, guys, you remember this won Best Picture? Okay, it didn't win at the Razzies. It's a decent movie. Despite all the problems, it's a decent movie. Let's not pretend this is some garbage film here. Okay.
yeah. A lot of people have a lot of feelings on Braveheart.
Yes. And those are fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Let us move on to other movies from 1995 that we liked. And this is our Should Have Been a Contender segment. And we can talk about movies nominated for other Oscars or movies completely ignored by the Academy. So, Daniel, did you have a few here?
I have quite a few here.
First and foremost,
I had never seen Dead Man Walking until last week. What an amazing movie. I love that movie.
Absolutely.
I can't believe that wasn't nominated for Best Picture. That movie blew me away. I did not expect to love it as much as I did. So I am shocked that didn't make a bigger play. I'm so glad Susan Sarandon won her Oscar. Man,
and that
all
was
around
overdue.
Yes,
Oscar.
absolutely. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm so glad that it was at least recognized, in that way, but definitely should have been in Best Picture. I'm not sure what I would kick out, but definitely should have been there.
For sure. Yeah, I really love Dead Man Walking as well. I actually watched that in high school.
Oh, nice.
That was a very powerful experience, just like watching that in a classroom, just like, oh, wow, this is like heavy. Very, very heavy.
So heavy. And so it still feels like that didn't feel dated. Watching it for the first time, didn't feel like it, it still has as much relevance today, if not more so. Man, yeah, love that movie. Can't rave enough about it.
One of my favorite Sean Penn performances too.
So. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, I like Nick Cage in Leaving Las Vegas, but I was trying to go back and forth on if I would have given it to Sean Penn or not. But yeah,
I would have personally.
Yeah,
but
it's a really great performance. So that's definitely one of the big ones for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would say one that didn't get any nominations was Before Sunrise. Definitely.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy that's nowhere here. It at least deserved its nomination for screenplay, like its sequels got. But
absolutely.
Yeah, so that one's a big bummer for sure. Easily one of the best of the year.
And that's, people always go back and forth on which of those movies they prefer the most. Mm-hmm. I'd say they all just work together perfectly as this almost 3-act movie of its own. But I just can never get over just the sweeping romanticism of Before Sunrise.
Yes.
It's just like this beautiful, idyllic gem of a movie.
Yes, hard agree. It is so, so good.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't know what the climate was, why it didn't get nominated, whether it was too small in its time. So yeah, that's definitely sad it didn't get there. Another nominated film that I think could have made a better play. I saw somebody on Twitter asked a very similar question, but I think Toy Story could have maybe deserved a higher ranking than it got in its time. Obviously, it was well beloved, got a screenplay nomination and the honorary Oscar, and among other things. But I could, if we're talking family films.
Yeah. I should just mention, this is a question from Love Kyle Bailey on Twitter. He said, if there was only one slot for a family movie, do you think it should have been
Hmm.
Babe or Toy Story?
Yeah, and
Good question.
again, I don't want to say that there's only one spot for a family movie because all movies should have an equal shot at it. But if I'm giving it to one or the other, obviously I think that Toy Story has, carved its place out in history. It changed, film history. It changed the film industry in so many ways.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think I would actually nominate it. I definitely like it more than Babe, even as much as I do like Babe. I would probably give it the Best Picture nomination. I think Babe deserves its Best Director nomination over Toy Story.
Yeah.
But still, I think I might put it in Best Picture.
I agree. Again, yeah, as much as I do like Babe, I mean, Toy Story is literally a legacy making
Come on.
movie.
Yeah, come on.
So I think it could have been a close contender here.
Yeah.
Obviously, it does get that screenplay nomination. And
Yeah, I think if we're talking 9 or 10 nominees, I
Yep.
think Toy Story makes it easily.
absolutely. Yeah. It's still a great movie. I mean,
Yes.
it doesn't have quite the same impressiveness of animation, obviously, because they're
Right.
just starting out. But for a feature length 3D animated movie, that's still one of the best.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And spawned an entire company, and well, I guess the company was already there, but it just changed. It changed animation, and we don't even see, because of Toy Story, we don't even see really hand-drawn animated films anymore. And
Yep.
good or bad, it changed the industry.
And I can certainly go back and forth on and how I feel about
Hmm.
that aspect of things. It's kind of like, why can't we have both?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah,
I always forget that Joss Whedon has a writing credit on Toy Story. It is so random.
yeah, a lot of people have a writing credit on Toy Story.
Yeah, including Joel Cohen, but not that Joe Cohen.
Yeah, not the one you're thinking of.
Yeah, so random.
Yeah, we've got Joss Whedon, Andrew Stanton, Joel Cohen, Alex Sokolow, John Lasseter, Pete Docter, and Joe Ranft.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's quite a bit.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
obviously, great movie.
Yes.
For me, I wanted to mention a few others. I totally agree with all of those that you said. I want to mention To Die For.
I have not seen To Die For.
You must. It is such a great satire of reality television and news culture, and just, I don't know, it's so good. And Nicole Kidman, absolutely one of her best performances.
And it was a
For
shock
me-
that she wasn't nominated, right? I mean,
Yeah,
she was
because
kind of expected.
she wins the Golden Globe.
Right, yeah.
And does not even get a nomination here. Ugh, yeah. She is like the definition of iconic in that movie. So, yeah, you must check that out.
I will.
I also wanted to mention another much smaller movie that really didn't have a shot of making it in, but Safe, which
Another
is
film I haven't seen.
directed by Todd Haynes, the great Todd Haynes.
Right.
And another great Todd Haynes, Julianne Moore collaboration. It's in the Criterion Collection.
Mhm.
It's really, we talked about Dead Man Walking being a heavy movie. That is very heavy as well.
Mhm.
It is essentially, for those who don't know, because it's a very small movie, basically it's about a sort of upper middle class housewife who is diagnosed with a disorder that she feels like there's something wrong with her, but she can't quite point out what it is, and no doctors can figure out what it is really either. And she has to go to a special rehab, and it's just really, really intense. And Julianne Moore, one of her absolute best performances as well. So many great lead actress performances in this year.
Yeah.
So yeah, check that out if you haven't. What else? Obviously, The Usual Suspects is a big movie from this year.
Yeah.
It wins 2 Oscars, so that's pretty crazy that it also, those were the only nominations for The Usual Suspects.
Right,
And it wins
right.
both of them. It wins Kevin Spacey.
And both major ones, yeah.
Yeah, Kevin Spacey for supporting actor, and original screenplay, Christopher McQuarrie, who's relevant now from Mission Impossible.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah. What do you make of The Usual Suspects?
You know, when I watched it, I guess probably back in high school is when I watched it for the first time. I, loved it. Rewatching it, I think it's still really good. Very good movie. It kind of dropped in my rankings a little bit. I think it's one of those movies that once you know the twist, it doesn't. I think it loses a little bit. But Kevin Spacey gives a fantastic performance. Obviously, there's a lot of problematic things now with much of that movie. Much of the obviously with Bryan Singer and Kevin Spacey, but still, it's a good movie. Very good kind of mystery and great cast. So yeah, I think it deserved I think Kevin Spacey deserved his Oscar, and I think it's a great screenplay. Trying to think, I guess I would give it to Usual Suspects. Out of these nominees, out of Usual Suspects, Braveheart, Mighty Aphrodite, Nixon, and Toy Story, I guess I would probably give it to Usual Suspects.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, watching Usual Suspects again is kind of like, again, you do know the twist going into it.
Yeah,
a little bit like The Sixth Sense in some ways.
Yeah,
but it also kind of feels like a puzzle more than a movie sometimes.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah, that's good.
Where I don't know if there's like really distinct characters so much as just character devices and kind of chess pieces in a sense.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. I that's exactly what I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's slightly disappointing, but obviously just still fun to watch.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's so strange. Out of these nominees, I don't feel really passionate about any of them winning Best Original Screenplay. Really,
yeah, I know.
It's so weird. I mean, I guess just the puzzle piece nature of Usual Suspects, kind of makes it a worthwhile winner. Even if I love Toy Story more.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said. What do you think of Leaving Las Vegas?
So I didn't get a chance to rewatch that. I haven't watched that in a few years. So I don't have a more recent opinion on it. But I remember liking it a lot. A very like kind of heavy movie in so many ways. But a really good performance from Nicolas Cage, which is something that we don't say anymore. So it's so weird to think that he, won an Oscar, even though he deserved it for this film. So really good movie for sure.
Yeah. Not one of my favorites, to be honest. I just mention it because obviously it's relevant to the race. It gets into major categories, including director, actor, actress, and screenplay. So major player probably would have gotten in a field of between 5 and 10.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think it's just one of these movies that is a little bit like Monsters Ball for me, where it's just kind of such a grimy sort of movie.
Definitely.
That obviously it's intentional, so it's not like a bad thing, but just for me personally, it's just never really fun or engaging to watch.
That's why I didn't rewatch it.
Exactly. Well, there you go.
It's good. Like, it's a good movie, but it's not one that I want to revisit.
Right, ever.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Nicolas Cage is very good. I probably would have given it to Sean Penn, to be honest, but I think it's kind of cool that Nicolas Cage has an Oscar anyway. So
just so you can see the shock on people's faces who don't know that already.
Exactly. Yeah. And Elizabeth Shue, very good performance here too. I wish she would be in more roles like this nowadays, but here we are.
Absolutely. And while we're on the subject, a lot of hookers nominated this year, which was very strange. Elizabeth Shue, Sharon Stone, and Mira Sorvino, who wins for Mighty Aphrodite. That's just odd.
Yeah,
especially when
that's
none
a little bit
win.
troubling to me. That's very troubling to me, honestly.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Kind of the state of what people were liking in female roles in 1995 is a little bit like, well, all right.
Yeah. No, totally. Absolutely.
I also just wanted to mention the annual Meryl Streep nomination here in The Bridges of Madison County. I actually really like that movie. It's very romantic, and I don't know. I weirdly like the chemistry between her and Clint Eastwood, even though that doesn't really feel like it would make sense.
Right. Yeah.
It works for me. It's one of her better performances. I think she puts on another accent. I like it.
Yeah, it's good.
So let's get to just a few other questions because Jeffrey Kerr asked, "Did you think Colors of the Wind from Pocahontas deserved to win Best Original Song, or do you think You've Got a Friend in Me from Toy Story should have won?" I guess those are our only options.
Yeah, what about Dead Man Walking? No.
Yeah, that's a good song.
Obviously.
Have you ever really loved a woman? Hello.
Right. Let's be honest. Of course, You've Got a Friend in Me. It has made a much bigger impression in culture and lasted a lot longer than Colors of the Wind. So, of course, personally, I would give it that. I guess Colors of the Wind won. It's the more traditional winner, and at the time, it feels more, it's more dramatic and more whatever than the kind of silly feeling of You Got a Friend in Me. But man, You Got a Friend in Me is one of the best songs from a movie ever. It's just so good and so well used in the film and well used in the sequels. And yeah, so I give it to You Got a Friend in Me every time.
Yeah, I definitely respect that, but I would vote for Colors of the Wind.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me why.
Because while I do think that the kind of tune, the music aspect to You've Got a Friend in Me is very unique, very distinct. When people hear it, they're like, oh, that's a Toy Story song. I just think it's, oh God, people are going to hate me for saying this. I just think it's not distinct enough almost in terms of the lyrics.
Oh boy.
When I think of Colors of the Wind, it creates such a beautiful kind of text painting. And, have you ever heard the wolf cry to the blue corn moon? Hello. That alone gets my vote.
It's beautiful. I don't fault you that, but it's hard for me to separate from the film too. I'm not a big Pocahontas fan. For me, it's one of the weaker of the Disney Renaissance. And so going up against Toy Story, again, I know I'm talking films, not songs, but I give the edge to Toy Story. And then just looking at the cultural context, how much it's lasted in history, so much more. But obviously, that's not what they're voting on at that point. So, right. I see why it won. It's not like a shock to me that won over You Got a Friend in Me.
Yeah, I guess I'm just more sentimental. As you can probably guess from this entire conversation.
That's
Okay, so as we wrap up this discussion, it's a little bit of a transition here because we have to talk about a very important thing that happened with the Academy. Speaking of rule changes and new categories, we have the splitting this year of Best Original Score into Best Original Dramatic Score and Best Original Musical or Comedy Score.
Yeah, super silly.
And this was kind of seen as a response to Disney winning this category every single year. It won for The Little Mermaid, it won for Beauty and the Beast, it won for Aladdin, and it won for The Lion King. So it pretty much was just the Disney category for a long time.
I understand the response, but what's hilarious is that after Pocahontas wins Best Original Musical or Comedy Score, no other Disney films win it while it exists, which is like, it's almost like a middle finger to the category.
Exactly. Very ironic. I mean, I think this is kind of dumb, honestly.
It is.
Because there are no other categories that divide by genre.
Yes, and it's the same thinking that leads to Best Popular Film, that just because Disney is winning and they're not serious, they're not dramatic, they're not this or that, they don't deserve to win the score. Well, if they're the best score, then they deserve to win. And so stop trying to take that away from them. And that's what this was. And so not take it away from them, give them their own category. You compete in this category, but not the real category. And it's just silly. And it's funny that we're talking about this Oscar year, because I just wrote an article about this for Next Best Picture. So this category lasted, or this split I should say, lasted until the year 2000, where they merged the categories back to what it is now, just best original score. And that led to the creation. And, if they're going to get rid of this best original musical or comedy score category, they replaced it with best original musical, which is a category that is still on the books and could still be awarded any year that they want to award it, as long as there are enough contenders, which is really weird and fascinating that this is the only category that exists that they don't award and never have awarded.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
When I read that article of yours, I was blown away. Honestly.
So weird.
I was like, how did I not know about this?
Right.
And
right.
why is it still a thing almost?
Yeah.
Considering it doesn't ever get awarded.
Yeah, and it never will. I mean, according to the current rules, I went back as best as I could to try to figure out the last year in which films were eligible for this award. Films would have been eligible for this award, because you need, I believe, I don't have the article in front of me, I believe it was 9 original musicals in each year that would qualify, and they have to be, of course, original, not adaptation. They have to have, I believe it's a minimum of 5 original songs. And so the last year I could find that meets that criteria was 1964. So it's not happening anytime soon. So I don't know why they don't just abolish it.
Well, who knows? Maybe The Greatest Showman will just lead to this groundswell of new original musicals.
I would like to say that La La Land would do it instead of The Greatest Showman, but your point still stands.
I think they both coincide. Yeah,
I don't like to give Greatest Showman much credit for anything. So
no, that's totally fair. That was probably a bad example, but I'm just saying because it's most recent.
Right.
And I actually found an article from the New York Times from the year 2000 after it was replaced or made back into best score. And Alan Bergman, who was the chairman of the Academy's music branch at the time, actually kind of defended why it was made, essentially. And he said people were voting for the songs, not the underscores.
Yeah.
We felt that Academy members outside the music branch didn't distinguish between the two. So when a score like The Lion King is competing against a drama like Forrest Gump, it's apples and oranges. Not in the quality of the score, but in the way it functions in the movie. There's a big difference.
So. I mean, I understand his thinking. I think definitely the idea that people are voting for the songs when they're voting for score, I get that. And I think that's fair. But then he starts talking about how they're apples and oranges. That's where I totally disagree. I think the score for a lot of these Disney films is great, separated from the songs. Yeah. So, I don't know.
Yeah. And then the later quote where obviously the thing has been abolished, he just fully admits the comedy and musical category was an experiment that didn't work. It was tried because there are so few song scores each year, and this would allow them to compete. But the Academy at large said, we'd feel more comfortable if you'd roll this back to the way it was and go back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I hope that quote applies to Best Popular Film in about 6 months. I hope that's exactly what they say.
Amen. Yeah. Crazy year, as we've outlined here. Just absolutely nuts. So do you have any more movies you wanted to mention here?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning. I was just kind of looking through the awards, and I think we have to mention the fact that Batman Forever was nominated for Best Cinematography. I think that is one of the most wild nominations in Oscar history. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't know how that happened.
I know.
So
I don't either, honestly.
So bizarre. I don't know what happened there.
I mean, I would understand like art direction, which it didn't get nominated for.
Right.
But cinematography? Okay.
Yeah, I do not get that at all. But I just had to mention that. Another movie we haven't really talked about, except for in Al's question, Heat. I think Heat is a great movie from this year that got 0 nominations, which is really surprising.
What happened there?
Out of all I would say it could have contended in, or I'm not saying it deserved nominations in all these categories, but I think it was worth consideration for cinematography, editing, score, a lot of these categories. I mean, so I'm a little confused as to why it got 0. It's very, very surprising.
Yeah, and you would think it would be like Catnip for voters.
Yeah,
Al
absolutely.
Pacino, Robert De Niro, Michael Mann.
Right. Yeah. Very, very surprising. And it's his fault. Michael Mann's follow up to Last of the Mohicans. So
Yeah.
very, very surprising.
So sometimes these weird things just happen. They fall through the cracks, and you
Yeah.
don't really know why when you look back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to talk about for the year. I do kind of hold a special place in my heart for Batman Forever. Like it's Joel Schumacher. It's kind of silly, but
Bombastic. Yeah.
oh yeah, but very colorful and just kind of fun.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So when we come back, we will be giving our verdict as to whether we think Braveheart deserved to win Best Picture or if Apollo 13 should have taken it.
The nominees for Best Picture of the Year are Apollo 13, Brian Grazer, producer. Babe, George Miller, Doug Mitchell, Bill Miller, producers. Braveheart, Mel Gibson, Alan Ladd Jr., Bruce Davey, producers. The Postman, Mario Vittorio Cecchigori, Gaetano Daniele, producers. Sense and Sensibility, Lindsay Duran, producer. And the Oscar for Best Picture is presented to Braveheart.
And we're back. So Daniel, you mentioned wanting to do a few more movies that we failed to mention here.
There's just so many. Yeah. So many fell through the cracks. I was looking at my list of like my top 10 and realizing so many fell through. Like Clueless. I'm a little surprised that didn't show up maybe in screenplay.
Oh, yeah.
And then Seven, which only, if I'm not mistaken, what did it just get? Editing, I think, is all it got.
I think so, yeah.
And so yeah, both of those obviously really have endured in culture for sure, and they didn't show up too much. Well, Clueless didn't show up at all, right. But yeah, so many great movies from this year. I really don't think of 95 as a great year, but it really is. Yeah. It has a lot of great stuff to offer for sure.
Yeah, like I said, I was just surprised just looking back, just how many.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to the task at hand.
Yes,
Daniel. Do you think Braveheart deserved that Best Picture win, or should Apollo 13 have taken it?
I think
I know the answer.
I'm so bad. Yes. Well, there's so many things to think about. I'm so bad at like a definitive answer. So if I'm voting, one all day long, Apollo 13 gets it, and it's not even close. So I think absolutely Apollo 13 deserves Best Picture over Braveheart. But I understand the win. It's not one of these years where it's kind of confusing or shocking or anything like that. I get the win, but in hindsight, or not even in hindsight, just all around, I think Apollo 13 is very easily the better film, and holds up a lot better than Braveheart does. So yeah, definitely, absolutely, Apollo 13 deserves it.
Totally agree on that. I think between the two of them, Apollo 13 is better, and it's not even close for me. Yeah. And maybe on some days I would vote for Sense and Sensibility, but I think Apollo 13 would have made for such a great Best Picture winner in the 1990s.
Yep.
And it has really, I think, stood the test of time. Yeah. And maybe, people still talk about Braveheart, of course, and reference it all the time, but I think Apollo 13 is just right up there too as one of those great all-American kinds of movies.
Yeah.
That you can just rally behind and sit anyone down in front of. And shouldn't that be what a Best Picture is?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. Okay, well, this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Daniel, for coming on with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes, if you want to tell people where they can find you on the internet, feel free.
Yes. So you can find me on my main show, the Screeners Podcast. We're on Twitter at ScreenersCast. Or you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find me on Twitter at HowatDK. And I sometimes write for Next Best Picture, so you can find some of my stuff there.
Nice. And you can find me at Kevin_Jacobson, and you can find the show at Oscar Runner Up, and you can find the show on Apple Podcasts / iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Please rate, review, and subscribe. And now I turn it to you, asking whether you think Braveheart deserved to win or if Apollo 13 should have taken it, and you can vote on my website at filmtrophies.com or email me at filmtrophies@gmail.com. So thank you very much again, Daniel.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.